Hi there, my name is Lev Mukhanov and I'm a researcher in Queen's University, Belfast. And today I would like to present our paper on automatic synthesis of DRAM reliability stress viruses using genetic algorithm accepted at Micro 2020. This work has been done in collaboration with Dmitros Nikolopoulos from Virginia Tech and George Konstantinos from Queen's University, Belfast. Our study has been funded by European Commission through Uniceron and Opricom projects. In the beginning, I would like to say a few words about motivation for our study. It's predicted by the end of 2020 there will be 50 billion devices connected to the internet. Thus, huge amount of data need to be processed and stored using DRAMs. However, it's well known that DRAM devices are error-prone. And moreover, DRAMs are the primary source of hardware failures in data centers after hard drives. The key question, how we test DRAM reliability in the field? Indeed, DRAM vendors test reliability of their chips after manufacturing. However, how users, for example, operators of data centers, can test reliability of their DRAM devices, which programs and which micro benchmarks they need to use to test reliability of their devices. In the following slides, I will present DRAM organization and the main factors that affect the DRAM reliability. DRAM devices consist of cells. Each cell contains a capacitor and access transistor. All the cells are organized into two-dimensional arrays, and if you want to access to a row of cells, then you need to activate a specific word line, and then the charge of each capacitor will be sensed by sense amplifier from bit lines and then stored in row buffer. There are different types of errors that can be manifested by DRAMs. However, in this study, we particularly focus only on the soft errors and particularly on the errors induced by the cell-to-cell interference and the charge leakage. So there's important circuit parameters that affect energy consumption, such as voltage, refresh rate. You need to periodically refresh your capacitors, otherwise you can lose the charge. And there's also timing parameters. So the following factors can have DRAM reliability. The circuit parameters such as voltage and refresh rate, temperature. It's well known that the number of errors grows exponentially with temperature. And also it depends on DRAM devices, since DRAM reliability varies across chips even though manufactured by the same vendor using the same technologies. The DRAM internal design also affects reliability, particularly types of cell, the mechanism used to exclude faulty cells from arrays such as scrambling, and data mapping function implemented in the memory controller, which maps the virtual memory to the physical memory. Finally, the program data and memory access patterns have also a significant impact on DRAM reliability. Thus, there are several challenges and questions which we're actually trying to address in our study. So what is the worst case DRAM behavior, and what's the program and data and memory access pattern that trigger the worst DRAM error behavior? And most important question, which we're trying to address in our study, is how to design programs that manifest the worst case DRAM error behavior without knowledge of DRAM internals. To address the last challenge, we implemented a specific framework, which is called DStress. The main idea of DStress is to parameterize and encode program and memory access patterns. We present all the memory and access patterns as variables and use these variables in genetic algorithm, which search for the specific data and memory access patterns that maximize the number of DRAM errors. To this end, we extended a C programming language with special progs that encode variables that we use to describe data and memory access patterns. So here in this figure, you see the scheme of DStress, and there's three different stages in our DStress. The first one is a template processing stage, where DStress analyzes the templates which define specific types of memory access pattern, extract variables, and pass them to synthesis phase, where genetic algorithm use selection, crossover, and mutation function to generate a program with specific data and memory access pattern, which is then evaluated on a real hardware server, which we use in our study. So at evaluation stage, we generate the program, which is called virus in our study. Then we run this virus, collect errors, and measure the number of errors, in other words, manifested by a specific virus, and store these results in database. And then genetic algorithms uses for generating another viruses, which generates more errors than the previous viruses. So it's important that for characterization of DRAM reliability, we operate DRAMs under relaxed parameters such as voltage and refresh rate. Otherwise, characterization under nominal parameters may take months. In our study, we use Ampere XGen2 servers. It's ARM-based servers. However, I'm going to skip these slides to save some time. You can find information about the servers used in our study, in our paper. But it's important to mention here that we can control the refresh period in our server, and we can control also the voltage. And finally, we also implemented an additional temperature test band that enables us to control the temperature of DRAM devices. Regarding DRAM error metrics and convergence criteria, our server implements ECC, single error correction, and double error detection. And the firmware can report to the Linux kernel all the single bit errors that has been detected and corrected by memory controller, which we call CE, and all the uncorrectable errors. So it means that if there's a 2-bit compromised in 64-bit word, then it will be reported to the kernel, to the Linux kernel, as uncorrectable errors. There's also probability of so-called silence data corruption. It means when there are more than 2 bits corrupted in 64-bit word. However, in our study, we focus only on correctable errors and uncorrectable errors. We limit the search period for genetic algorithm by 2 weeks, and we use 2 convergence criteria to stop the search in case if, for example, 40 worst case data or memory access pattern are similar. In the following slides, I will present the data and memory access pattern that we use in our study. So we start our experiments for the search of 64-bit data patterns. In this experiment, we are searching for a 64-bit word that maximizes the number of DRAM errors when we fill a memory with this word and then read the data back. We also search for extended 24-kilobyte data pattern. In this particular experiment, we identify all error-prone rows. Let's suggest that row 2 is error-prone, and then trying to find the data pattern for such rows and the data pattern of adjacent rows that maximize the number of DRAM errors within error-prone rows. In our experiments with access patterns, we're trying to replicate row hammering attacks. So in row hammering attacks, if you want to compromise data in a row, then you need to access frequently to the adjacent rows to induce the cell-to-cell interference that may compromise the data in the target row. We implemented 2 templates. And the first template, we tried to understand to which particular 32 predecessors and 32 accessors of error-prone rows we need to access to increase the probability of DRAM errors. We encode these pattern using a 64-bit binary array. In our second template, we are trying to understand to which particular element in the adjacent row we need to access to increase the probability of DRAM errors. And this is why we define the access index of elements which we want to access in a linear form, whereas A is a step and B is offset. In next slides, I will present the results of our 7-month experimental study. I will consider only the results of our study for correctable errors due to the lack of time. And in the beginning, I would like to say that we have not discovered any program or viruses that trigger uncorrectable errors for temperatures below 62 degrees. In these slides, you see in figure A, 40 worst case 64-bit data pattern detected by DStress. So each line is a pattern, and y-axis present the number of errors, correctable errors detected for each pattern. And the search of 64-bit data, worst case 64-bit data patterns converged in 1 week. And here you see the worst case patterns, and we clearly see the pattern here, which manifests the highest number of errors. Particularly see that the specific order of bits in data patterns increase the probability of errors. To investigate how the worst case data pattern change with the temperature, we also run the search at 60 degrees. And here you see results of the 40 worst case pattern detected at 6 degrees. And we see that we managed to find absolutely the same pattern as in case of 55 degrees, which implies that the worst case data pattern doesn't change with temperature. To investigate if the discovered 64-bit data patterns are effective for DRAM error characterization, we compare the number of errors induced by these data patterns with the number of single-bit errors triggered by micro-benchmarks that have been widely used in the previous research studies. To be more specific, we run checkerboard, walking zeros, walking ones, all ones are micro-benchmarks. In this figure, you see the number of errors triggered by each micro-benchmark and a worst case data pattern. You see how the number of triggered errors is distributed across 2 DIMMs. And we observe that the 64-bit worst case data pattern induces 45% more correctable errors on average than walking zeros, which trigger the maximum number of errors among all micro benchmarks. The search of the 24 kilobyte data pattern that maximizes the number of correctable errors also converge in our study. In this figure, you see the 40 worst case the 24 kilobyte data pattern. We present ones using the light green color and zeros using dark green color. And the search converged also in 1 week, and we also clearly see the pattern. Importantly, this pattern differs from 64-bit data pattern discovered by DStress, and what is more important, it triggers 20% more errors, which implies that there's a significant effect of the data pattern on cell-to-cell interference. Unfortunately, the search of access pattern was not so successful, and the search of access pattern didn't converge in our study. And here you see the 40 worst case data patterns detected for our first templates. So here you see each line is access pattern, and each bit represent 1 if we access to adjacent row with a specific index, and 0 if we do not access to a specific row. And the search didn't converge for our first template. Same results were obtained for our second template. We were not able to detect any particular pattern, any particular order in which we need to access 2 rows or elements of the rows to increase the probability of error. However, we clearly see that the worst case access pattern manifested by 71% more correctable errors than the worst case 24 kilobyte data pattern, which implies that access pattern has a significant effect on DRAM reliability. The important question, did we really discover the worst case data and memory access pattern? In our paper, we present a methodology to estimate the probability that there exist data and memory access patterns that trigger more errors than the viruses discovered by DStress. And we also demonstrate that the discovered viruses trigger the worst case DRAM error behavior with extremely high probability. Finally, we believe that DStress has many use cases and will be extremely useful for designing new DRAM reliability stressing mechanisms. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any question, please join our discussion at Micro 2020.